It started as one of those slow, golden afternoons that seem too quiet to be real. The kind where the hum of the air conditioner feels louder than your own thoughts. I was sprawled across the bed, my phone in hand, half reading messages I didn't care about. Claire, my wife, had gone to visit her sister for the weekend. Her text from earlier still unread. Don't forget to water the plants. We'd been married 8 years, and lately, even her reminders felt like they belonged to a routine more than a relationship. That's when I heard the knock, light, hesitant, like whoever was on the other side wasn't sure they should be there. I called out a casual, "It's open," thinking it was probably a delivery or a neighbor borrowing sugar. But when the door creaked open, it wasn't just anyone. It was Jenna, my neighbor from next door. She stood there with a plate wrapped in foil and that familiar disarming smile. Her blonde hair was pulled into a messy bun, a few strands falling around her face, and her blue eyes seemed softer than usual. Tired, maybe. "Hey," she said, her voice half apology, half nervous energy. "I hope I'm not interrupting. I baked too many cookies again." I sat up, trying to mask my surprise. "You're saving me from instant noodles. So no interruption at all." She laughed lightly, a sound that felt brighter than the room itself. For a moment, I saw her not as the friendly neighbor from across the fence, but as someone carrying a quiet weight behind that smile. As she placed the plate on the nightstand, her gaze drifted to the framed photo of Claire and me at our wedding, frozen in a happiness that now felt like someone else's memory. "You and Claire make such a great couple," she said softly. I didn't know how to answer that. "We try," I finally said, but the words came out hollow, more reflex than truth. There was a pause, the kind that stretches between two people who both feel something they shouldn't name. She looked down, her fingers tracing the edge of the plate. "Tom's working late again," she murmured, "and seems like he's always got somewhere else to be these days." Her voice cracked slightly, and something in me stirred. Empathy, curiosity, maybe something more dangerous. "I get it," I said quietly. "It's hard when things start to fade." She looked up, eyes meeting mine for the first time. Searching, uncertain. "Yeah," she whispered. "Harder than I thought it would be." The air between us shifted, subtle but undeniable. She smiled faintly, as if realizing the moment was becoming something it shouldn't. "Anyway," she said, stepping back. "Enjoy the cookies." "Thanks," I replied, watching her leave. The door clicked shut behind her, but the silence she left wasn't the same as before. It felt heavier, sharper. I didn't know it then, but that small interruption, that plate of cookies, had just cracked open a part of my life I'd spent years keeping closed. The cookies sat untouched on my nightstand, their scent lingering like a reminder I couldn't ignore. I told myself it was nothing, a neighborly gesture, a harmless visit, but the truth was harder to swallow. Jenna had walked into my room that day, but what unsettled me was how easily I had let her. Over the next few days, I found myself noticing things I hadn't before. Her laughter carried across the yard when she played with her dog, the way her porch light stayed on late into the night, the faint sound of her and Tom arguing, muffled words, doors shutting too hard. I didn't mean to listen, but once you've glimpsed someone's cracks, it's impossible not to look again. Claire came home Sunday evening, full of chatter about her sister's baby shower. I nodded, smiled where appropriate, but my mind kept drifting back to that quiet knock, that look in Jenna's eyes. Guilt prickled in me like a splinter, sharp but hidden. Nothing had happened, yet something had shifted. In me, between us, in the fragile balance of ordinary life. That week, I ran into Jenna by the mailbox. She was wearing sunglasses, even though the sun had already begun to set. "Rough day?" I asked, half teasing. She hesitated, then sighed. "Just one of those weeks. Tom's been distant, There was a pause, the kind filled with words neither of us was supposed to say. "If you ever need to talk," I said, immediately wishing I hadn't. She smiled, small, grateful, and a little sad. "Careful, I might take you up on that." I laughed it off, but the words stayed with me. Later that night, I told Claire about Jenna's baking, how she dropped by with cookies. Claire smiled faintly. "She's sweet. Tom's lucky." Then she went back to scrolling her phone, her face illuminated by its cold blue glow. We were sitting inches apart, yet it felt like she was a world away. I looked at her and wondered when that distance had started. When conversation became obligation, when laughter turned into routine. We'd built a good life, a neat home, stable jobs, predictable weekends. But somewhere along the way, we'd lost the warmth that made it feel alive. The next morning, as I was leaving for work, I saw Jenna standing in her driveway, holding a travel mug, her hair pulled back, her expression far away. She noticed me and waved. I waved back, forcing a polite smile. But the flicker of connection was there again. Brief, undeniable, dangerous. It wasn't love, not even attraction, not yet. It was recognition. Two people quietly drowning in the same emptiness, each pretending not to notice the other reaching for air. As I drove away, I caught one last glimpse of her in the rearview mirror. For reasons I couldn't explain, it felt like watching the beginning of something I wasn't ready to admit could end badly. It began innocently enough. A text here, a casual wave there. Jenna had this way of making ordinary moments feel deliberate, as if every word carried hidden meaning. It wasn't flirtation, not exactly, but it wasn't just friendship either. We were both careful, both aware of the invisible line we were inching toward. One Thursday evening, she messaged me. "Tom's working late again. You free for coffee?" I stared at the screen longer than I should have. It was just coffee, I told myself. Neighbors having a chat. Still, my pulse quickened as I typed, "Sure, come by." She arrived with 2 mugs and a tired smile. The air between us felt charged, not from anything said, but from everything left unsaid. We sat in the living room, the glow of the table lamp painting her features in warm light. She talked about Tom, how they barely spoke, how silence had become their language. I listened, offering sympathy that felt too personal. When she laughed at one of my clumsy jokes, I caught myself admiring the way her eyes softened when she smiled. "I sometimes think," she said quietly, "people stop trying when they believe love should sustain itself." I nodded, her words cutting deeper than she knew. Claire and I hadn't fought in months. Not because we were happy, but because there was nothing left to fight for. Our peace had become polite indifference. As Jenna stood to leave, she hesitated by the door. "Thanks for listening," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "You make things feel less heavy." The words stayed with me long after she left. They shouldn't have meant anything, but they did. Days turned into weeks. Our conversations grew longer, our messages more frequent. What had started as comfort became connection, and connection soon turned into habit. Every time my phone buzzed, a part of me hoped it was her. Every laugh we shared chipped away at the wall I'd built around my conscience. One evening, as I returned from work, I found her sitting on her porch, a glass of wine in hand. "Rough day?" she called out. "You have no idea," I said, walking over. We talked for hours. About regrets, about missed chances, about how strange it was that two people could feel so alone surrounded by love. Somewhere between the laughter and the quiet pauses, our hands brushed. It lasted a heartbeat. No longer, but it was enough. The world stilled, like it was holding its breath. She pulled back quickly, eyes wide, guilt written across her face. "I should go inside," she murmured. I nodded, unable to find words. As she disappeared behind her door, the weight of what almost happened pressed hard on my chest. That night, lying awake beside Claire, I could still feel the ghost of Jenna's touch. A single, fleeting moment that had somehow changed everything. The following week unfolded like a blur. Awkward smiles across driveways, brief greetings shadowed by everything left unspoken. I told myself the moment on her porch was nothing, a fleeting lapse caught in loneliness. But denial is a fragile defense. Beneath every ordinary day, a quiet anticipation simmered. The need to see her again, to feel that unspoken connection that both comforted and condemned me. It was Friday evening when the balance finally broke. Claire had gone to visit her mother overnight, leaving the house still and strangely hollow. I was halfway through reheating leftover pasta when there was a soft knock at the door. My heart skipped before reason caught up. When I opened it, Jenna stood there. No pretense this time. No plate of cookies or borrowed excuse. Just her, looking uncertain and tired. "I didn't mean to bother you," she began, but the tremor in her voice told another story. "You're not," I said, stepping aside. She walked in quietly, her hands clasped, eyes darting around the room like she was seeing it for the first time. "Tom and I fought again," she whispered. "He said maybe we need time apart." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to comfort her. Another part wanted to run. Instead, I poured her a glass of water and listened. She talked about the arguments, the distance, the ache of feeling unseen. I found myself confessing too. Not about her, but about my own marriage. How Claire and I had become polite strangers under the same roof. For a moment, it felt like we were two wounded souls, seeking warmth in each other's shadows. When she looked up, tears shining in her eyes, she said softly, "Do you ever feel like you're living someone else's life?" "All the time," I admitted. The space between us collapsed, not in words, but in silence. The kind that hums with things neither of you can undo once they begin. She reached for my hand, tentative at first, then firmer, as if the act itself was an answer. The room felt smaller, heavier, but before the moment could cross that irreversible line, she let go. Her breath hitched, and she shook her head. "No," she said, voice breaking. "This isn't right." Her words struck through the haze, clear and sharp. I nodded, my throat too tight for speech. She stood, wiped her tears, and forced a small trembling smile. "You're a good man," she whispered. "Don't lose that trying to fix what's already broken." Then she left, the door closing behind her with a quiet finality that echoed louder than any storm. I sank into the couch, staring at the empty glass she'd left behind. The smell of rain drifted through the open window, cool and cleansing. For the first time in months, I felt the weight of everything I'd almost done, and the truth of who I was becoming. Outside, thunder rolled faintly in the distance. Something had ended, but something else, something harder, had just begun. The morning after Jenna left felt strangely calm, like the world had exhaled after holding its breath too long. The sun slipped gently through the blinds, illuminating the empty space where she had sat the night before. I made coffee without thinking, each motion mechanical. Pour, stir, sip, repeat. But the quiet wasn't peaceful. It was heavy with everything unsaid, everything that almost happened. I told myself it was over, that I'd been given a chance to step back before crossing a line I couldn't return from. Still, guilt clung to me like smoke. Every sound from the house next door made my chest tighten. A car door, a faint laugh, the slam of a screen door. I couldn't tell if I missed her or the version of myself she made me feel like. Alive, noticed, understood. Claire returned that evening. She brought the smell of her mother's cooking, and a warmth I hadn't realized I missed. We sat on the couch, half watching a sitcom, half pretending we were fine. At one point, she reached for my hand. It startled me more than it should have. "You've been quiet lately," she said softly. I hesitated. "Just tired, I guess," She studied me for a moment, eyes searching for something beneath the surface. "I miss how we used to talk," she whispered. That simple confession hit harder than any argument could have. For the first time in a long while, I didn't deflect. "I miss it too," I said. "Maybe we should start again." We talked late into the night, not about problems or solutions, but about memories, about the small, silly things that had built us once. It didn't fix everything, but it was a start. Fragile and uncertain, yet real. A week later, I saw Jenna in her yard. She waved, a polite, distant gesture, the kind shared between people who once stood too close. I waved back, grateful for the space that now existed between us. Life moved on quietly after that. There were still moments of doubt, flashes of what if, but they no longer defined my days. Instead, they reminded me how easily comfort can become temptation, how connection without clarity can destroy more than it heals. Sometimes late at night, I still think about that day she knocked on my door, how something so small could unravel so much. But I've learned that temptation doesn't always announce itself with passion. Sometimes, it whispers in loneliness and looks like understanding. Now, when Claire laughs, when we share coffee in silence, when she reaches for my hand, I hold it longer, not out of guilt, but gratitude, because I came close to losing her without ever doing the thing that would have broken us. And maybe that's the quiet truth of it all. Sometimes, the greatest betrayals are the ones that never happen. And the deepest forgiveness is learning who you almost became.